Okay. Okay. Let's make sure we got everything set up, and we are getting started now. Welcome. I'll wait till 8, and then I will begin the broadcast. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock, and this is where I'm going to wait for a minute or two, and we'll get started. Okay, well, it's 8 o'clock, so I am assuming that we have gotten started. And welcome to the Orthodox Apologetics channel, week 5. I'm Deacon Joseph Swaden, and today I am alone. So hopefully, if all of you have lots of questions, hello, Bait Lord, hello, all the stars are dead, hello, everyone listening. And so hopefully you guys have lots of questions because I don't have a co-host. Father Enoch is back from the Philippines, but unfortunately he seems to have come down with a bit of a cold. So we're going to see what happens. But, we do have questions to start with. So, there's a lot to talk about that's been going on the war zone today. So I definitely want to bring up some of those topics. But first, of course, I do want to get to an original question that was posed to us to answer by Basil Polivka. He asked on the talk tonight, could you and Hiram Monk Enoch address the question of baptism and the mysteries outside the church, and how one should explain divergent reception practices throughout the centuries? I'm also interested in what you hearing what you both think of usury interest on loans. To answer the first question, basically you have to go back to the canons of Saint Basil, and the reason why this is important is because of the fact that if you look in the history of the church, right, all the way if you're going right back to those early centuries where they're talking about Arians and other types of heretics, then basically the question becomes how did they see it then? What we notice is that there was always a level of recognition in terms of how the baptism was properly done. Take, for example, the Arians in many areas used the exact same liturgical form for baptism. And so the church was able to take that and say, okay, well, this is the exact same liturgical form. There's no need to repeat that. Now, of course, there's a question of whether they recognized Arian baptism or whether they simply recognized the church's form within Arian baptism. And that's really the root of where we get into what are called quote-unquote Greek or Russian practices. But in reality, there's always been variation in how the church chooses to receive people. In general, the way the church chooses to receive people who are outside the church altogether is by baptism. And then as you're dealing with different kinds of, groups or heretical sects, then basically questions come up. Okay, can we just chrismate this person? In the case of the Uniates who were received when St. Alexis Toth brought people back, most of those people were received back by confession, because the truth is they didn't even know that they weren't Orthodox. And so, and you have to take the psychological state of the person in mind. You have to, they're pastoral questions, and that's why the church has variant practices. But baptism, of course, being the standard, chrismation being much more common. And I should also mention that chrismation is actually a repeatable event. It's not typically repeatable, but in the case of where a person, say, for example, goes into apostasy, then it is a theoretical it's a theoretical possibility. But in any case, so that's the first thing that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about baptism and the use of economy. As for whether there are mysteries outside the church, it's a much trickier question, and one that unfortunately continues to be debated even today. The standard Orthodox teaching is outside the church. There's no salvation. The bigger question, and one that's been kind of like it's been debated by different groups, etc., is kind of an Augustinian position, where basically if there can be mysteries outside the church, those mysteries actually damn people or hurt people because they're not in the church and therefore it can't help them. So these are questions that in general, mysteries outside the church or the question of baptism are usually very closely tied up with the relationship that the ecclesiastical body once had with the church. It's much more of a question when it comes to schismatic groups as opposed to heretical groups that have completely changed their form. I don't think, for example, there's not an Orthodox on earth who would think that, say, Mormon baptisms are okay or stuff like that. So that's basically where I would go with it. As for the next question, in what we both think of usury and interest on loans, hopefully Father Enoch can contribute on that next week. I don't think that there's not much to think about usury. Usury was considered a sin by the church from the very beginning. The assumption is, you don't lend to even get returns. But when you do, you can't exact more money out of the person who needed it. It's considered unfairness and harmful to them. So the church has historically been against usury, and there are a number of canons, there's Nicaea, and then you have also non-ecumenical local synods which condemned usurious practices which were going on because it was considered a predatory practice to lend at interest because you were getting more money back. So that with that said, it's not an if or and it's not an and or question. The church has basically always been against usury. Should Christians individually be engaging in it? In general, no. It's considered a sin. I don't know if it's a different story if on a small scale teaching people. A lot of it was tied into the fact that lending at usury was done by certain groups that were not in the church, and it was a way of taking advantage of the people that they were lending to. So, in general, usury, as especially institutionally, should not really be respected. But it comes to a question of monetary systems, and the church in general has not been in favor of usury. So I think that's something to answer. Okay, and we have a question from Baitlord here. It says, every Orthodox Christian says to read the Church Fathers, but how does one do this? Do the Church Fathers have books on Amazon or something? How can I read the Church Fathers? Well, yeah, actually, the Church Fathers do have books on Amazon. That's one way to do it. I would say that one of the largest sources of the Church Fathers that can be found in English are the Erdman set, which you can find on the Christian Classics Ethereal Library, ccl.org/fathers. And almost all of those volumes are from saints of the church, with the exception of like Origen and Tertullian, which still have some value, but not nearly as much as, say, reading St. Augustine or reading St. John Chrysostom or reading St. Gregory the Great or St. John of Damascus, etc. And these are substantial volumes. They're not easy. They're not easy reading. They're not, overly complex that nobody can touch them, but they are sufficient that when I hear someone say, well, I've read the Church Fathers, chances are they haven't read the Church Fathers. And I know that because of the fact that I read a lot of the Church Fathers, and I would never say I read the Church Fathers, because that makes no sense. The Church Fathers literally all the way, because in Orthodoxy, the patristic period doesn't end. So you're still talking about like St. Gregory Palamas and St. Mark of Ephesus and St. Seraphim of Sarov and people up to the present day. I think one day Father Seraphim Rose's stuff is going to be counted among the fathers. But the point is that that's really voluminous. Like, that's a lot of reading. And so when I hear someone say, I've read the Church Fathers, I don't believe them. In general, to read the Church Fathers, it should be done patiently. I will include a link at the end of the show on Father Seraphim Rose's How to Read the Church Fathers in terms of acquiring an Orthodox mindset. So definitely, reading the Church Fathers is definitely something that should be done, and it can be done for free and on mobile devices. You don't need to, the Church Father series from Erdman's was 37 volumes. And back when books had a lot more value, that was a substantial amount of money. The set would cost you $300, but you can get the entire set for free now on the internet. So the point is that even just that, even if you were to say tack into even 15 of those 37 volumes, you would get a better patristic mindset than a lot of the lighter stuff that we see coming out, which I'm not condemning. It's not bad, but the point is, when people say you need to read the Church Fathers, it is quite possible to do. It should be done with an Orthodox mindset, but it's not something anyone should be afraid of, and they should have the confidence of knowing that it can even be accessed for free. So I think that is definitely a main thing that people should do. Especially, I make this point that in Orthodox Apologetics, you have to read the Church Fathers. And what I mean by that is all of our argument has to come from the fathers that came before us. Orthodoxy has no place for novelty or innovation in argument. Even the clarifications that we find in the ecumenical councils were clarifications of previous teaching. They weren't to introduce new teaching. Orthodox teaching is generally defensive in that it has to defend the faith of the fathers that was previously held. And so that is definitely something that makes it's very important. I will include a link to this Christian Classics Ethereal Library so that you can access them. There's another one, tertullian.org. I'll include those links. Lord, first off, well, thank you for your question, and I hope I've answered it. But definitely, I will include a link to Father Seraphim Rose as well, and those links to get you started. I think it's everyone should do that. So that is something that I want to. I want to definitely impart that if you can read into the Church Fathers, you should. Okay, so now I think that answers all the questions that we've gotten previously. So we've run through them pretty quick. It's kind of different when you're by yourself. But in any case, one thing that I want to talk about. Well, actually, you know what? We're going to try something new and fun. There have been previously comments that were made, and so I am going to start looking at them because I haven't actually done that. I should probably look at YouTube comments also. Alios Schlickgruber commented, new to your channel. Do you have anything about how bad ecumenical agendas are? The World Council of Churches, to be exact. God bless. Look forward to watching. Well, yeah. The ecumenical agenda is basically ecumenism is basically known as a pan-heresy because, as we've stressed before, it ultimately takes every other heresy and basically says it's okay, effectively nullifying what orthodoxy is, which is the true faith. The ecumenical agenda is sinister. It continues to affect Orthodox today. And where people are left confused as to whether or not, the Roman Catholics are part of the church or the Protestants are part of the church. These were questions that were never asked 100 years ago. They weren't known at all. It was impossible to even believe that. So what I would say is that the ecumenical agenda has been going on for a while. Since, probably since the 1910s, 1920s, it really kicked into high gear with the World Council of Churches, especially when the Moscow Patriarchate joined in, I believe, the 1950s or so. And it's finally showing its fruits, because ultimately the only product of ecumenism is indifference. And because of indifference, people fall away from the church. The answer to ecumenism, as I have said many times on the Facebook group, and I think I've said one or twice here, the answer to ecumenism is apologetics, because the easiest and the best answer you can give to somebody who says there's no absolute truth is to show them how there is and why they're wrong. And that is why apologetics is the cure for ecumenism, ultimately. So, I'd like to thank Alois for his comment. 1683 Vienna. Hi, Father. I'm a Catholic and I'm considering converting to Orthodoxy. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. And if you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat box. I will be glad to answer whatever I can. Let's start scrolling into here. A friendly reminder: the Earth is not a planet. It is a misnomer that has arisen in recent centuries as a result of the error of heliocentrism. None of the great and holy fathers are going to. I'm going to stop there. The person who's saying that, hello, Craig, Kipring, Crawford. I'm not going to. I've argued this on the War Zone. Basically, he tried to point to some fathers who held to the Ptolemaic model. They did say that their scientific knowledge was, incomplete, that in general our scientific knowledge was incomplete. So insofar as their main point, which was, and what they were bringing up, which was that the universe has a finite beginning and an end, and that it was created by God, is actually something that is now considered basic to science. Whether you're a Big Bang cosmologist or you're a young Earth creationist, everyone agrees that the universe started somewhere, not that it existed forever, as the pagans and atheists of the time were saying. So, the closest that you have to that in the modern era is steady state cosmology, and nobody believes in steady state cosmology. So in the end, the fathers were right. But I think focusing too much on questions like the Ptolemaic model versus, the Copernican model is silly. I don't think that the fathers had any intention of enshrining the Ptolemaic model as some sort of dogma. So I'm going to leave that one alone. Let's see here. Good talk. Is there a podcast available to listen on the go? That's from Eloise again. I don't know. I would assume you can listen to this in podcast. I don't know. I haven't made them podcasts. Okay, I'll be honest. I'm not really sure what a podcast is. I always thought it was just recorded stuff, and we kind of do that. So I would assume we could just be listened to on a pod thing. Not really sure what that is. But if anyone wants to help me with that, just let me know. I will be glad to answer any questions on that. Let's see. There's a lot of the discussions now that we've had over the past few days in the war room and the war zone, of course, are related to the question of schism, etc. We got a question here. 1683 Vienna. For much of history, Western Europe has been cut off from the Orthodox East. If the Orthodox Church is the only way to salvation, then how could the people in the West have achieved salvation? Well, unfortunately, the question, again, and we could expand that to the question of Western Europe, or we could say Africa before any period of enlightenment, like sub-Saharan Africa before any period of enlightenment, or so on and so forth. The problem is that outside of the church, we have to retain the position that we don't know. Unfortunately, when Western Europe was cut off from the Orthodox East, it was done in a very deliberate fashion, as I've said before, by Hildebrand of Savannah and his followers in the creation of the Roman Catholic Church. It was not an accident of history, as is commonly believed and as popular, wisdom holds. Historically, that's untenable. What actually happened was that, unfortunately, Orthodoxy in the West was literally smashed out, and the organization that took over created what would be the Roman Catholic Church today. It is a sad circumstance. Unfortunately, I don't know what, they're well-meaning people all over the world. But we have to go by what, our Lord says in terms of his being the way to salvation. It's not, the bigger problem, as awful as it sounds, is we tend to think, well, it's not merciful to not allow the Catholics or allow the Protestants to share in salvation. Well, what about the pagans? Eventually, what happens is we fall into universalism. We have to have faith that people will find a way to join the true church. And if you look, even in early American history in the 1700s, random people, Europeans, Western European descended Americans, were finding orthodoxy. And they still were trying to reach it. That goes all the way back to St. Anthony the Roman in 1067, who in the midst of the schism wanted to know where to go and found himself in Russia and eventually stayed there. So, I believe firmly that God inspires people to look for the truth. I hope he has mercy on the rest, but for those who are inspired to look for the truth, I have faith that they're going to find it. And that's part of the reason why we have the Apologetics channel, why we do apologetics, is because we have to be able to show that orthodoxy is the true faith. And I think that that's one of the great failures that has been brought on by ecumenism. How many people, even in Orthodoxy say, oh, well, everyone's all kind of in the same church anyway. And what happens is they're causing other people to lose their souls. I can only think for as many people that have listened to this podcast, not podcast, I'm sorry, I still got that word in my head, any that have listened to this broadcast, that for every single listener, there are now, I would say there's 500, maybe 1,000 people who have told somebody who was outside the Orthodox Church, it doesn't matter. You can just go to your church. I mean, you're not Greek or you're not Russian. And people's souls get lost that way. That's something that people are going to have to answer for at judgment. I would hate to be in the shoes of anyone who said that. And, I think that if we have the ability to answer questions on behalf of the true faith, we have a responsibility to do it. And if we don't do it, then we're not doing our job. We were talking, Father, I'm going to bring up Father Enoch, even though he's not here. We were talking earlier over the past couple of days about Julian Joseph Overbeck, the founder of Western Rite Orthodoxy, and his death in 1905. But what people don't realize is that he was also the last real great apologist of he lived mostly the 19th century. He died in 1905. But he didn't just write about Western rites and so on and so forth. He actually wrote a book called I believe it's something like the Teachings of the Orthodox Church Against All Religions. Like he went through every single denomination or all the other denominations, and he went through every single one of the denominations, pointing out their errors compared to the teaching of the Orthodox Church. That is what we're supposed to be doing. And the fact that we're not doing that, we are now. I'm seeing a lot more. There's Orthodox apologetics groups left and right, and it's great. They don't all like us, and we don't all like them, and we all get along. I think some of us have some crossover there, but the point is, we're all looking to defend the faith, and that's something that, to be quite honest, even 20 years ago didn't really exist. So that's a tough question to answer. I think the question is what responsibility we have to teach the people about orthodoxy when we are Orthodox. As to how people in the West could have achieved salvation, that's left up to God. But I do believe even in those centuries, people did find a way. God had mercy on those who intended to, but couldn't exactly reach it. 1683 Vienna, I hope that answers your question. And thank you very much. Baitlord asks, until 1965, America had an immigration system that favored Europeans over other civilizations because Europeans can integrate a lot easier. Is this morally wrong? I think it makes sense because people of divergent cultures are a lot harder to assimilate into our society. Well, this is kind of an American question and not really an Orthodox question, but I mean, I can try to shoot for it. First off, I think that limiting it to 1965 is kind of mistaken. I'm glad I could help Vienna. And what I mean by that is that there were periods where even other Europeans were not wanted in the United States. And so it was really limited to people of Anglo-Saxon descent. And, this also, keep in mind, this is also a period where we had a lot of African slaves, if you look in the 1800s. But the point I'm trying to make is that assimilation into a society, I mean, once you get into, the question of culture, the problem is that American culture is at its root a Protestant culture. And this is why you notice that when the United States did moves in Latin America, so on and so forth, they brought Protestant missionaries with them to break the Romanism that you'd find in Latin America or in Asia, so on and so forth. But this isn't just true with Roman Catholicism. In Alaska, after St. Innocent's mission to the Alaskan people, that he did native work. One of the problems was that later Russian priests just stopped using the native services. But the other big one was that the American government, in acquiring Alaska, began sending Protestant missionaries to break the orthodoxy of the people there. So I think that's, I don't know that American assimilation as just American assimilation is necessarily a good thing. We have to ask, can these people be Christianized in an Orthodox sense? In that sense, I think there's much more to be said for, say, Mexicans coming in because they have a Roman Catholic background. I think that they can be, more easily assimilated. As for people of Islamic backgrounds, that's a tougher question because historically, that's something that, again, it's not. I'm not saying don't import, don't allow Muslims in. I'm simply saying that it's a much different worldview that requires psychological assimilation. As far as I'm concerned, if I was watching like Gary Pena or something, he was his financier and he was born in the barrio with, Spanish speaking parents who taught him only in English. And he's a billionaire. I mean, but the point is, I think that assimilating to American culture is not necessarily difficult. Assimilating to an English language culture is not difficult if you learn English. My parents were both immigrants. They made sure that I learned English as my primary language. So that's why a lot of people don't even realize that I'm Hispanic. But the point is, I think that when you're dealing with cultures like Islamic culture, yeah, there's going to be some modifications. And because you can't, Sharia law does not work like American law. And that's something that's seriously got to be considered. But unfortunately, immigration quotas being flexible things that vary based on the whims of whatever president is in power, it's a tough situation. Again, I think that it would be great if everyone who came to America suddenly switched and became Orthodox Christian, but I don't think it's realistic. So I'm not sure how to answer that. One thing we can say is that in almost all of these countries which have Islamic cultures, there's also substantial numbers of Christians who get persecuted or get killed. So clearly it's not that they're like completely averse to Christianity. It's the religion itself that causes the problem. And that's a tough question. I would think that, and this is one of the problems with American law, not necessarily Russian law, but if you look in Russia, they can do all sorts of things that we can't. But in America, it goes into the whole First Amendment thing, like whether we can infringe upon someone's religion, so on and so forth. And then are we doing the same thing that they are in reverse? It's tough questions, Baitlord. But it's definitely worth something to think about. But the goal is, no matter what, that everyone comes to Orthodoxy would be the way I see it. So in any case, that's the basics that I've got here. I hope that answered your question, Baitlord, and I hope it was satisfactory. Again, if anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat box, and I will gladly reach out and take a look. Now in that case, we're going to just recap here and look at some of the other things that. Okay, well, here's Samuel Sayans. He said, "I was wondering if we can find an Orthodox. There's an Orthodox resource where we can find PDFs of different synods and councils. The Synod of Jerusalem, 1672. I'm looking for a PDF copy so that I can read it. I think I may have found a PDF copy of the Ecumenical Councils, though. There are a few things that you can find on the 1672 Council. There are even books on that. But one thing to keep in mind is that there is a difference between the acts of a council and the canons of a council. Most people are familiar with, for example, the canons that one finds in the Rudder or the Pedalion. And so, but that's not the acts of the council. The acts of the council often give even more information. And some of those things are not available online, but you can find books that do have them. So that's basically the next thing that that's what I would suggest is looking for books specifically on specific councils, and you can often find things like the Acta, etc. Okay, well, I hope that answers Samuel's question. We're going to move here. Bait Lord, you're welcome. That's you said Dick Shane there. Okay, and 1683 Vienna. If you were the president, would you kill an innocent person if it meant saving the lives of 1,000 other people? What would a Christian do in this situation? Well, I wouldn't be the president because, according to the canons, clergy cannot hold political offices. So that's not something I'm going to answer. It is a tough question. Unfortunately, one thing we do know from 2,000 years of history is that leaders often have to make ugly decisions that the church would not necessarily condone. Whether those political decisions would be right or wrong are debatable. Again, secular power and secular authority are things that can be done they can be handled in many different ways. And where the church has to disapprove is what is acceptable and what is not. I guess what we're going to end up talking about there is just war theory. Because if you're talking about one person versus saving the lives of 1,000 other people, but then you throw in, well, that person's innocent. The question is, if you're in a situation like that, what you would want to do, ideally, is find a way to save all 1,001 people, as opposed to an either-or choice. But again, I'm not a political leader, so I haven't been faced with that decision, and I'd hate to think about it. So hopefully that helps Vienna. Atomic Lead writes, Papist interloper here. Oh, well, welcome aboard. Can you please address the main point of contention in the online Catholic Orthodox argument, the essence-energy distinction, and the related issue of created versus uncreated grace? Well, that's okay. I'm not sure what the main point of contention is in online Catholic Orthodox argument is. It kind of implies the Catholics and Orthodox agree on everything except for one or two major things, and that's not reality. Orthodox have disagreements with the Roman Catholic position on almost everything, and whether you realize it or not, it's very much I remember when I was Roman Catholic to think, oh, there's just a few things separating us, but it's separations of thoughts and worldviews on a host of issues, including variations in thoughts, full disagreements on almost every single one of the sacraments. When you put that in concept with also the ecclesiological question of the structure of the church, there's not one single point of contention. These are two extremely different religions. And so that is the first point I'd like to make out, is that only one of them can be the truth. It's not like, well, if we just agree on this one thing, we agree. No, they're two different churches, and only one of them is the Catholic Church. Our position is that, we are the Catholic Church, and if you want to address a specific point, I'd be glad to help. Now, since you mentioned a specific point, the essence-energy distinction, it is important to remember that the essence and energy distinction isn't unlike the question of created versus uncreated grace, it is not, it's not a philosophical construct. It is a statement of reality. And what I mean by that is the essence of God is considered that of God which cannot be approached by anything. It cannot be touched by anything. And why that's important is because in the scripture it talks about our God dwelling in unapproachable light, which means he can't be approached. But if he can't be approached, how does he interact with his creation? The answer to that question is in the energies. The energies are what interacts throughout the world. Ultimately, Barlam's position on created and uncreated grace was to imply that things like the burning bush, which Orthodox would refer to as a theophany or a vision of God, a revelation of God, to just be a created phenomena. But the problem with this is that if God is that separated from his creation, things like the Eucharist can't happen. So this is something to keep in mind, because if you're saying that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ, well, if it's just created grace, then ultimately it is impossible for the body and blood of Christ to actually be the body and blood of Christ unless Christ is not God. So that's where that real distinction comes in. So when we're talking about essence and energies, the energy is that which partakes within the creation because of the fact that it interacts with it, but the essence is untouchable. And so, and that I think is, St. Gregory Palamas, I think his views have even to some degree colored certain Roman theologians, but the point is, that is our general position. So I hope that that is helpful. We're going to go in order. So the next person, I hope that helps so far. I see Atomic Lead's written more, so we'll get to it. We always go in order here. Now we have KCCI. I'm wanting to convert to Orthodoxy from Calvinistic Protestantism. Reading the Church Fathers has helped me think this way. Good on you. Reading the Church Fathers, always the best. However, there is one doctrine I can't see is the assumption of the Theotokos. Is it an essential dogma for the Orthodox Church, or do you not have to accept it, Father? God bless from the UK. I can't see it in the Scripture nor in the Church Fathers. Can you explain it to me where it comes from? Thank you. Sure. It's interesting that you say that, because the dogma of the Dormition, or the teaching of the Dormition, that the Mother of God fell asleep and her body was carried up into heaven, is a long-standing tradition of the Church. But because of the fact that this is kind of funny, when the Pope proclaimed the Assumption of Dogma in 1950, some Orthodox theologians, just because the Pope proclaimed it, said, well, no, it probably isn't true then. Well, they didn't last long, of course, because the Dormition is a feast day in our church. And really, the reason why you don't find much of that written is because when it occurred would have been the death of the Mother of God, first off. So between the Acts, the epistles, etc., she was still alive. Whether she was still alive during the apocalypse of St. John, I am unsure, but he had a different purpose in writing it. In short, when Mary finally, the Theotokos finally, laid to rest and died, her body was taken up to heaven as a singular privilege. She was not awake. She did not resurrect herself and ascend into heaven. She was taken up into heaven by God. And that's, again, one thing to keep in mind is that very few cases of this exist. You're talking about Enoch, you're talking about Elijah, you're talking about a Lord, you're talking about the Theotokos. But what these things are supposed to point to is the fact that we believe in the resurrection of the dead, and we believe that we are going to regain our bodies at judgment, for whether it be, judgment towards heaven or hell. It's a long-standing tradition of the church. You can find, references to it in historical documents going all the way back to at least the 3rd and 4th century. People were reaching to the Mother of God in prayer as early as 251. Documentation was. So the point is, we're not saying that the Mother of God has any special powers over all the saints, but she did give birth to Christ, which is a unique and singular privilege. But the tradition, there's nothing tied to it. Like, it's not tied to an immaculate conception or anything like that. What it comes right down to is that that's what happened, and that is what the tradition records happened. That's when we look at the tomb and things like that. That's, the tradition is that, her body was taken up. It is not, it's not really in Scripture because it wasn't really addressed. A lot of things, though, weren't addressed, especially the early martyrs and the apostolic fathers and so on and so forth. But basically, it's a straightforward teaching. It's not. There's, whether she had been brought up or not is not I wouldn't say it's very material. She had to be purified to, receive our Lord. So in that sense, we do regard her liturgically as the new Eve. And so in that sense, I would think that her body would be shielded from the fallen earth until the final judgment. That's at least the logic to what I'm saying. So I hope, KCCI, that answers the basic question. And if you have new questions, please let me know. Okay, let's see. Atomic Lead wrote, I meant to say that essence energy seems to be the major issue that comes up. Sorry for not being clear. Trads tend towards Aristotelian Thompson. I think that, the essence energy thing, which actually was the thing that actually got us started doing Orthodox Apologetics on YouTube, was because, people like the Diamond Brothers bring it up because they love to say that, Gregory Palamas was, had these Eastern beliefs because of what was derisively called navel gazing when it was just really focusing while saying the Jesus prayer. I think that if one looks at the essence and energy distinction in terms of God's movement within himself and unapproachable versus God moving outward towards his creation, it makes perfect sense. If there's anything confusing about it, let me know. Hope that answers that question. Atomic Lead, we're going in order. 1683 Vienna asks, I know you are a true Orthodox Christian, Father, but if you are World Orthodox who wanted to attend a divine liturgy for the first time, would you join the Russian Church or the side of the EP? Well, that's I'm not a World Orthodox, and if I wanted to attend a divine liturgy for the first time, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably try both because they are very. If the EP church is, say for example, a Greek church, I was catechized in the Russian church, so I'm kind of biased towards it. But I don't know that that's necessarily, the case. I've been to Greek churches that are very nice, and so it's tough. If you're asking about the question regarding Ukraine, I technically think the Russians are theoretically more right, and I put that in quotes. But I think if you're a first timer, to be quite honest with you, I would go to both, regardless of how this whole thing works out between the EP and the MP. The Greek and the Russian tradition are both hallowed traditions of Orthodoxy, and I would think you'd want to get a look at both of them. Because they're both cherished within the church. Both of those traditions are cherished and loved. And, I think that, I would say try one, then try the other, and then, make a decision from there. And keep asking questions. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's continue on. Atomic Lead. I tend to Catholic Platonism, so I sympathize with Eastern Catholics who aren't big on Aquinas. Well, I'm Orthodox and I'm not big on Aquinas because, unfortunately, what we know now is that some of the answers he attempted to give were based on faulty texts. So, because there was a lot of mutilation of the patristic text going on, that unfortunately form a lot of the basis of the Summa Contra Gentiles and other things, as we've talked about on previous episodes. I'll see if I can list which episode we did, but we talked about the error rate from his quotes based on the fact that he was using interpolated texts, which were then corrected a couple of centuries later. Okay, and let's see. So I hope that answers that question, Atomic Lead. We continue on. Bait Lord, what are 3 to 5 verses that argue for orthodoxy? I don't understand that question. The entire book is our book. I mean, if you're asking where in the Bible can you really see the Orthodox Church, I would have to say that the biggest book of the Bible that you could use is the Book of Acts. And what I mean by that is that you can see the formation of the church at Pentecost. You can see how the apostles are darting through. They're fighting each other. They're occasionally breaking up, working with each other, getting back, spreading the gospel, building the church itself, establishing bishops, establishing priests, so on and so forth. And I think that really the Book of Acts is what I would call the church book. So that is, I hope, the most helpful answer I can give on that. I don't know that I'd go with straight 3 to 5 verses. Is there? Okay, well, I'm staying in order. So Samuel Silians, I apologize if this was already asked as I just joined. You said that the first prayer to the Theotokos was 251, if I heard correctly. Is there history of prayer to saints earlier than this? I didn't mean to imply that they weren't praying to saints before that. What I'm simply saying is that the most documented thing we can find in terms of reason in terms of early prayers to the Theotokos goes as early as 251. It's important to remember that with the Book of the Apocalypse being written in AD 90, you're talking about a difference of 160 years. And so you're looking at the period of the Apostolic Fathers, where you can already see, because remember, this was also a persecuted church. So in a sense, the question of prayer to the saints being something alien makes no sense. The early church, when they were in the catacombs, did their Eucharist on top of the bodies of the martyrs, because that united them to Christ's sacrifice. The idea that in some way, shape, or form the saints were separated from Christ is nonsensical, and that's why a lot of the Protestant hostility that occurred with the saints in the Roman Catholic teaching occurred because of the whole thing of the treasury of merits and the mechanical idea that there was like plenipotentiary graces and so on and so forth, that made it sound like the church was a bank. It wasn't a bank. It was a living body, and the living members and the reposed members are all alive in Christ. And those that are reposed, I mean, I hate to bring up Star Wars, but it's like, when Darth Vader slices Ben Kenobi down and he says, if you can knock me, if you take me down, I'll only become stronger than ever. That's basically what we believe when our saints die, and it's no surprise that George Lucas took a lot of stuff from Orthodox trappings in the movie Star Wars. But the point I'm trying to make is that the saints, because they're reposed, are actually more capable of helping us now than we are on earth, because we're still fettered by sin, whereas the Church Triumphant is already free from that, and they're already helping us on earth. So let me see. Okay. Atomically, for the record, I'm not a Sede. That's fine, even if you were. KCCI, thanks, Father. And glad to help. 1683 Vienna. I take a position similar to the Diamond Brothers. I'm a Sedevacantist. Could you tell me why Sedevacantism isn't logical? Oh, yeah. Well, we actually, Father Enoch and I actually wrote a book, a short book about that, and we were inviting traditionalist Roman Catholics to come to the Orthodox Church. The main problem with Sedevacantism is that the structure of Roman Catholicism, Hildebrandian Roman, the Hildebrandian system that you find in the Dictatus Papae, etc., makes the Pope such an essential and effectively unlimited part of the Church that if you don't have one, I don't know if anyone remembers, I think it was this guy, Lucian Pulvermacher, or I think it was Pius, he called himself Pius XIII, and he was elected by like 6 random lay people. But the point is, one thing that he got right is that according to Roman Catholic teaching, if you don't have a pope, it is the duty of Catholics to eventually work to elect one. And so the point is, you can't have a situation where you have a false pope and then nobody else there. So that's the logical inconsistency that you find within Sedevacantism. I mean, you could argue the whole like La Salette thing, but in reality, the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, without a pope, ceases to function as it's supposed to. He assigns ordinary jurisdiction. There's all sorts of reasons. Now, none of this matters to Orthodoxy. That's not how we do things. But I'm saying within the Roman Catholic system as it stands, Sedevacantism makes no sense. Unless the closest you can get to something making sense is extraordinary jurisdiction, and that's really the SSPX's position to begin with. Okay, let's see here. Is there anything from the Old Testament? This is Baitlord. Is there anything from the Old Testament that makes a good argument for Orthodoxy being the true church? Well, yeah, I mean, the Old Testament church, we see the Jews in the Old Testament as the Old Testament church, which is why we take many of the saints and prophets, and they are included within our structure of saints and so on and so forth. So I mean, there's it's a weird question, because one thing to keep in mind is that, again, the church wrote the Bible, and we understood ourselves as the Orthodox Church. Before, the earliest heresies were Gnostic heresies, which kind of set themselves up against the church, but they didn't have the same organizational structure. They were basically personal cults of individuals. So, I mean, basically, I would say that the arguments for Christ that you find in the Old Testament are the arguments for the church, which is the body of Christ, as opposed to the question like, well, does the Old Testament or the New Testament prove a specific church? It definitely assumes the existence of one. And that is the most important question, because then you have to say, well, out of these hundreds of 100,000 differing sects, which one of them is the church? And I think the answer, just based on the apostolic succession, based on the ancient teaching, based on the creed, using even St. Irenaeus's formula for how to determine the church, and then we can use St. Vincent's formula for how to determine the church, how everything at all times, in all places. Once you establish that standard of Catholicity, I think that, once you've established from the scriptures that there must be a church, I think the only church that can be argued for is the Orthodox Church. Let's continue on. Hope that helped, Lord. Bishop Irenaeus, wonderful job. Deacon Jones, thank you very much. 1683 Vienna, thanks for that. Okay, Atomic Lead, thank you. You're welcome. Glad to have you. We're here every Tuesday. KCCI. Another theological dogma I can't fathom is the Theotokos being sinless. This dogma and the assumption is what's hard to accept right now. And I say this because Mother Mary said to Christ, my Savior, if she was sinless, why did the Theotokos say this? Thanks, Father. Okay, well, that's a good question, KCCI. And what I'll say is this: if we take for a moment and think about, the question of what does it mean to sin. And this is an important thing that you have to realize, because she was chosen. If we look in the Protevangelion of, I think, James or Luke, the Protevangelion that talks about the childhood of Mary, and of course we talk about the purification of the temple, which is a feast of the church. From a very early age, she was already chosen to live as a virgin, as a holy person, as one of the holies in the temple. So the point is, this is going to sound weird, but first off, she was a little kid, so we start with that. But on top of that, she was a little kid with specific duties. And I know from serving in the altar, basically it keeps you from doing other things. Now, can you get temptations when you're doing serving? Of course you can. But the point is, it was St. Mark the Ascetic who basically argued that the reason we do good things is to keep from sinning. And so the point is, so long as she was continually active and was, engaged in the temple, and the angel came down and God cleansed her through grace so that she would be a proper vessel for Christ, as long as she kept doing good things, she wasn't going to sin. And as odd as that sounds, I want to see if I can make this a little more real. I believe that it was St. Theophan the Recluse, and I quoted this, and I will get the quote, but effectively, when he was asked, well, how does one become a saint? He said basically, you have to go to church, you have to say your daily prayers, you have to confess, you have to commune, and you have to follow the fasts. If you do that, you'll be saved. Well, that sounds easy, but we know that it's not. And so the point is, in other words, we can see by not sinning, because she didn't have the ability not to sin. She could sin. We don't believe in an immaculate conception. She chose not to all the way to the end of her life. That's a huge difference. And if a person goes without sinning a day, which is near impossible because our minds as modern Westerners are so ruined. But if you can go a day without actively sinning, it's difficult. So the ascetic struggle that you're talking about, even if she was cleansed of sin, even if she was innocent and working in the temple when she was young, you still had the temptation to sin, but you didn't. And that could be the grace of giving birth to Christ and then having, the Son of God, as your child, basically making sure you don't sin. But the point is, then after his resurrection, there's, that temptation was there. And even St. John Chrysostom talks about her being tempted by despair when she was found, when she was found to be pregnant. But she did not fall to despair. And that's the point. We do good to avoid sin. And because we do good to avoid sin, that is how we avoid it. It's So I think that, in that sense, the Theotokos is showing us by example that if we are obedient to Christ, and as St. Mark says, we do not sin by doing good, we'll avoid evil. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure, KCC. I think so. And also that the question, she said to Christ, my Savior. Well, he is still her Savior. There's no way, right? He's the Savior of all humanity, including her. It's that simple. Okay. Basil Polivka, I just joined. Did you guys already answer the question I sent in, Deacon Joseph? I did, in fact, answer those questions. It's the first 10 minutes of the show. I don't know if you can rewind and start over, but yeah, your question was was my first question, since I'm the only one here right now. Okay, 1683 Vienna. If I become an Orthodox and identify as a nationalist, would I technically be a heretic? Well, it gets into the question of civic nationalism versus ethnic nationalism. Ethnic nationalism, I would think, falls under Philotism, but nationalism by itself is not necessarily Philotism. One can love their country and can be proud of their country. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the idea that God created separate races to the point where they are effectively it becomes a reductio ad absurdum, where Christ has to save every single race individually. All people are human beings, and that's really what it comes down to. That doesn't mean you can't love your country. That doesn't mean you can't love your culture. But you can't put down another's country or culture just on the basis that you believe you're better. We don't believe that. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but for crying out loud, that doesn't mean you have to hate your country. That's not the point. The point is you want to save your country. And there is no country on earth right now that is going to be saved. So everyone is falling. And our job is to save souls. Our job is to save people. So let me think here. Okay, and then, so I hope that helps, 1683 Vienna. Hope that helps, Samuel. Let's see. Okay, we're going to go to next. Samuel, thank you, welcome. Michael 21, 250 AD is significant because this is almost a century before Constantine, proving he did not bring in these innovations. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it is significant. What's it called? I will include a link to the papyrus, which shows the prayer to the Theotokos, and it's dated around 250, 251. So hopefully that helps a lot. No problem. Thank you, Vienna and Baitlord, too, for your questions. Samuel Sands, do you have any favorite Orthodox podcast series or audio resources of online Orthodox teachers you would recommend? I am still trying to figure out what a podcast really is, as I said earlier. So basically, what I am going to say to that is I will try to put some together. I know that there are a few podcasts here. If anyone would like to make recommendations for podcasts in the chat box, please do. I'll make sure to add them in the general text box, and we'll discuss some more next week. So I would hope to help. Okay. Basil, I see you asked the question. I'm going to give a short version, but I hope you listen to the longer version that we did earlier, which is there were different forms of reception of baptism. As for mysteries outside the church, they're generally not recognized except in terms of formal validity, unless you hold to an Augustinian position, which argues that effectively there can be grace in schism, but it damns the people receiving them. That's very similar to what was later known as the Cyprianite position among the old calendarists. And so different from the very beginning with heresies and with the canons of St. Basil, you can see that there were different forms of reception depending on similitude to the Orthodox form, how much of the Orthodox practice was retained. And usury is just wrong. It's considered a sin. I realize that in our fallen state, some people will do that. But it's considered a form of predation. The church has always felt that way from the First Council of Nicaea onward. And there's many local canons that back that up. Hopefully my more complete answer is better than that, but I hope I've given you enough to answer the question right now so that you listen at the beginning. Let me know. And thank you very much. Hope that answers that, Basil. Okay, justice for orthodoxy. Were there cardinals in the early church? Yes, but they were not the same thing that we tend to think of now, like with a college of cardinals and stuff like that. The cardinal clergy were generally the clergy that were local to Rome. So the cardinal deacon, I believe, was a deacon of a specific cathedral in Rome, so on and so forth. The electoral process during up to the time of the schism, if I remember correctly, it still involved bishops, and I could be wrong on this. I'd have to check with Father Enoch. I don't think that a college of cardinals was as it was not as prominent as it was until after the Hildebrandian period. Um, obviously, the Synod of Brixen that deposed Hildebrand was not made primarily of cardinals, though there were cardinals there. It was made primarily of bishops. So, the question is whether or not, if you're asking, did the early church in Rome have the elaborate system of cardinals that you have today? No, it did not. Cardinal clergy were more stational clergy for the city of Rome than a specific rank above the bishops or anything like that. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Lord, should abortion be legal for cases where the mother's life is threatened if she does not have the abortion? Wow, that's tough. And I'd honestly have to give that one to a priest, or I'd say, in a case like that, that really needs to go to a priest, because we're not talking about a rape or incest case. We're talking about where one person dies or another person dies. I'm not going to. How do I put this? I'm not going to automatically say that that's acceptable, because again, one of the problems that you deal with is that when abortions were first legalized, the health of the mother was used as an excuse, and that was it would sound like it's a good reason, but then they started talking about psychological health of the mother, because the mother was unhappy or depressed because she was pregnant, so that allowed the killing of the child for feelings. And so that, if we're talking about an ectopic pregnancy, I'm not gonna say like that's not an option. It might well be, but in most cases where we talk about the health of the mother, are we really talking about the health of the mother, or are we just looking for a way to do abortion? So I hope that answers that question, Bait Lord. And, it's a tough question. That's a real tough question. 1683 BM. Okay, Basil Palika, no worries. Thank you, Basil. I hope it's satisfactory. 1683 Vienna. Would it be immoral to establish a theocracy where all religions and churches apart from Orthodoxy are banned? No, I would say that was basically most of the Russian Empire. But in any case, no, the Russian Empire did have other religions, but they were very tightly controlled. Christian Empire is the default for most of Orthodox history. So it would be, I wouldn't say it's immoral. I'd say that was often the case, easily from the fourth all the way to the early 20th century with the killing of the Tsar. I would say it's much more common that the way we live now is more of the outlier in Orthodox history than not. But the question is whether the democratic experiment will fail, and we'll find ourselves under strongmen. And if strongmen take over, if you take like a Kim Jong-un example, or you look at some of the strongmen that have occurred in Latin America, and one of them was crowned an Orthodox leader, I don't know what to say. I'd say there's more historical support for that than praying for a 4-year term president. But it is what it is. So would it be immoral? No, it wouldn't be immoral. It's just, is it likely? I don't think it is. We'll see. Okay. Hey, Lord, will you consider going on a tour around Europe and doing meetups? I'm the wrong person to ask. Maybe Father Enoch would. We do have monastics in Scotland, and there are lots of Orthodox people in Europe already. And I went to Greece. That was the last time I went flying. I went to Greece 5-6 years ago, and I decided I'm just never going on a plane again. It has nothing to do with. I have nothing against other people flying. I just I'm not a bishop. I don't have any need to go evangelizing, and I just like being on the ground. That's just me. Sorry, but I mean, Father Enoch just went to the Philippines and back, so maybe he'd want to go to Europe. I don't know. And then we can still do it remote. I'd still be on the show from here. We're nice and comfortable, and I don't have to fly thousands of feet in the air and potentially sink thousands of feet if something goes wrong. That's just not my thing. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, thanks for the summarized answer. Have you read Father Peter Here's book, The Ecclesiological Renovation of Vatican II? I have not. I doubt I'd be surprised by anything in it. Father Peter Here's is a very sober writer. He is in world orthodoxy, but he understands the evils of ecumenism and surgeonism, and I think that he's got his head on his shoulders. So I mean, I haven't read it, but I'm sure it's good. So I hope if anyone wants to send me a free copy, I'm not against it. Just kidding, just kidding. I'm not asking for stuff. I haven't even we haven't even set up a Patreon, but that may come, and hopefully you guys will support us. But yeah, I haven't read that one yet. Sorry, but my guess is it's probably pretty good, considering I have nothing but respect for the author. All right, Atomic Lead. Is it correct that the East never taught satisfaction substitution like Anselm? I'll tell you, it's kind of funny that we talk about Anselm. I would say, if you're looking for what theology you can find, I would say really look at St. Augustine, look at the Council of Orange, look at some of those early councils to get the real teaching of how the atonement was held. Anselm of Lucca is integral. A perfect example, because somebody was asking, can we rehabilitate Anselm's memory? Is he okay? Among Western Orthodox, and I honestly, I've read some of his arguments, but I didn't really know his time period. And it's interesting because Anselm of Lucca was an early supporter of the Hildebrandian party when the West was falling apart and when the Hildebrandians were trying to take over the church. And in fact, he actually, scandalizes the monarch that he's under because he demands that he go under Hildebrand, that he go under Gregory VII, and he refuses. So basically, Anselm absconds secretly in the night, and the king takes his see away from him. And then basically, when he arrives at Rome, Anselm is told by Hildebrand, it's time for you to go argue with the Greeks and explain their heresies. So these proto-Roman Catholics are probably the first people that I would absolutely not take seriously in terms of their teachings on the atonement. I don't know what you mean by atonement theology. I mean, Christ acted as substitute for our sins. He saved us from our sins, more importantly, as well. And he opened the door of salvation. I would think that the liturgical understanding of salvation in Orthodoxy, whether of the Eastern or Western Rite, is far superior to any philosophy or theory. If there's a specific thing to answer in terms of what that theology entails, I'll be glad to, atomically, just let me know specifically what you're curious about. Okay. Basil Polivka, so remember you said in a previous podcast that you lived in Russia. Could you say a bit about your experience and thoughts on contemporary Russian society in relation to its Orthodox past? Oh, boy. I lived in Russia between a little before the end of 2004 all the way to the beginning of 2006. So I was there during Putin's first period, before Medvedev, and then Putin came back. It's a tough question because it was heavily. You could still see the effects of both the Soviet Empire, and you could see the effects of modern capitalism on Russian people. New Russians found, they were not populating the church in groves. A lot of the whole resurrection of Russia thing you read about was in little places like Yekaterinburg. It was not I lived in St. Petersburg, and it was very, very, in some ways it reminded me of Latin America. it was very superficially Orthodox. It doesn't mean that the people in the churches that were actually there, a lot of them were very sincere, good people, very serious, but there weren't that many there compared to the number of people that were in Russia. You could certainly see much more excitement for a Zenit game than you could for any church event. And that's it was sad. But now, from what I understand, that's slowly changing as they keep on pushing more to learn more about the royal family and how they died, so on and so forth. I saw a billboard. I don't know where it was in Russia, but it actually says, "Forgive us, O Lord, O Master," for Tsar Nicholas. That's something that would have been inconceivable, 25 years ago. But I mean, it might have existed when I was there. But when I was there, it was, it was still heavily affected by communism, heavily affected by capitalism. And what that ultimately created was a very secularized society with Orthodox trappings. And I hope that's changed. I don't know that 11 years would be enough for it, but I have faith. You never know. I hope that answers that question. Justice for Orthodoxy. As a Western Orthodox priest, do you know a good place to find true priestess and Western rite chants? Well, I'm actually not a priest. I'm a deacon. Father Enoch is a priest, but Father Enoch is not here. I mean, it depends. My personal favorite, of course, is. I mean, first off, let's get something clear here. Gregorian chant has been in use since before the schism. It is, by its nature, pre-schismatic. And so, what's it called? Gregorian chants are a good place to start. You want to look for choirs that don't. You want to look for choirs that don't sound. What's the word I'm looking for? Feminized, for lack of a better word. The problem is, the Roman Catholic. Chants. Like I would say Santo Domingo de Silos is not bad. I don't mind them. I do like the stuff that's put out by Marcel Paris's Ensemble Organum. But this is important to note that the Organum chant, which uses something similar to an eson, or Organum is like a rhythm holder, a placeholder, was itself very, very late and eventually led to the creation of polyphony. But if you're just listening to straight Gregorian chant, preferably from a good Benedictine monastery, you're basically getting the basics of Western Orthodox chant. Sarum chant, which is what we use, it's Gregorian chant with some slight differences. There are other chants like Mozarabic chant that you can look them up, and you have to look up each of the styles of music. They're not far from non-existent. Have they been largely forgotten in the Roman Church? Yeah, they have, but that doesn't mean we have to forget them. And my suggestion is, if you take one prayer, listen from 4 or 5 different choirs, and you'll get the basis of the sound without the tonal bias of a particular choir or group. So I hope that helps with that. Bait Lord, don't want to fly. Christine Blasey Ford intensifies. That's pretty funny, except she loved to fly for vacation, didn't she? Anyway, 1683 Vienna. Do you know of any good web pages or PDFs that explain why Catholicism is not the true church or why Orthodoxy is the true church? Yeah, I mean, the best one I can think of is orthodoxinfo.com. It's a very good site. Huge, comprehensive. I watched it built. Patrick Barnes worked on it for, over a decade. Lots and lots and lots of good information there. You can get lost on a site like that. I really recommend that one. Again, I recommend also, look at the Vincentian Canon. Read the Commonatory of St. Vincent of Lerins. Read, there's a lot more. There's a lot to read. There's so much. And we'll probably have to come up with a reading list. I know that there are a couple of reading lists out there, but we're gonna work on that. So we'll see how that goes. So I hope that helps. Try orthodoxinfo.com. I would suggest reading The Papacy by Abba Gute. I think there is actually a copy of it on orthodoxinfo.com. And basically, that's what I would say to that. So I hope that helps out. Bait Lord, why are the Oriental Orthodox Christians wrong? Well, they're not Oriental Orthodox, they're Monophysites. And in some cases, you have the Nestorians, the Monophysites, they disagreed with each other, but then they all kind of just united under this recent claim of a communion to make themselves look like they have some, unity where they don't. Each of them is different, and so, that is what I would say. Were any of them holding to the traditional position of the Orthodox Church? I think that to some degree, and of course they would argue differently, but they did not hold to the Catholic unity of the Church. For example, the Tome of Leo, they still argue today that Leo was a heretic, and so effectively, even though the Church basically endorsed, the Duophysite Christology. So that's why I would say that they're wrong. I would say that they, separated from the Church, and you can, go through a long history of it. There's discussions we have on that on the Orthodox Apologetics War Zone. Feel free to bring that up, but there's so many different reasons. But if we're just talking about the rituals, most of that is okay. I mean, their stuff is, it's still traditional. If they might have changed a few things, but they're not major. So I hope that answers that. And then, is it true that crypto Jews hijacked the Catholic Church between the years 1000 and 1500? Well, I would say the Hildebrandians hijacked the Roman Catholic Church till the present day, and I don't know if they were Jews, so no idea. Okay. 1683 Vienna. Who was this Hildebrand fellow you speak of? Was he the real-life version of Voldemort? Fun question. You can look on our channel for who invented the Roman Catholic Church. In short, Hildebrand of Savannah, also known as Gregory VII, was an anti-pope who in 1075 he basically created, even though he had been working on it previously with the Gregorian reform, he created the Dictatus Papae, which was a framework of a top-down absolute papacy, which had been previously unheard of in history. So horrifying were some of his ideas, which included forcing the filioque, getting rid of other Western rituals that were potential competitors to his modified Roman rite, so on and so forth, that the bishops, many of the Western bishops, got together at the Synod of Brixen after he deposed the emperor legally, which is something that, bishops never had the right to do. What's it called? They deposed him, and they put Pope Clement III in his place. And history shows that most of the church, the West recognized Clement III, and piece by piece, through war and so on and so forth, eventually the Hildebrandian line, 3 popes later under Urban II, finally managed to consolidate its rule and create what was known as the Roman Catholic Church in its earliest form. So I hope that answers that. Was he the real-life version of Voldemort? I don't know. I've never watched the Harry Potter movie. Sorry. Hope that helps. Atomic Lead. About the salvation question, I was mainly asking about Anselm of Canterbury's Satisfaction's Theory of Atonement, which I think was a book in the 1090s. I think that when we start looking at the crucifixion as having some sort of legal argument that, Christ paid a price for our sins, sort of like, his weight versus our sins weight on a scale, it starts making a lot less sense. Humanity was fallen, and Christ came down to reopen the gates of heaven to us. It's not so simple as a juridical, he needed to come down as it had to happen. He came down out of his volition to save us. It had, the time had already been prophesied in the Old Testament, and the church always held to the greatness of that event and the resurrection. I think once we start reducing it to questions of why, how it worked, it starts cheapening it because of the depth of what occurred. And if we look in the liturgy, if we look in the liturgies of Pascha, whether in the Eastern or the Priestess and Western Rite, there's so much in terms of celebration. Even the Christus Vincit, which is a huge hymn, the glory that occurred there, I think makes penal substitution theories look cheap. I mean, that's my personal feeling. So I hope that helps. On that Atomic Lead, I don't know if that answers it. If you want to get more specific, feel free. I'd be glad to help. 1683 Vienna reading list. Well, I'll do my best. Um, and then, Basil Bolivka is answering Atomic Lead. That's great. Okay. Yeah, that's true. I guess that's true too. Lord, thanks. Do pets go to heaven? The question long asked whether animals have souls. The general consensus is not like humans do anyway. So I don't know if all dogs go to heaven. I just kind of assume that they just kind of disappear. Um, and so hopefully, I hope that helps. I think the pets are there for our salvation more than we're there for theirs. God, takes care of them because they're innocent. Okay, let's see. No problem, 1683 Vienna. No problem, Atomic League. Justice for Orthodoxy. What true Orthodox churches is your synod in dialogue with? We are currently in communion with the Synod of Metropolitan Angelos of Avlona in Greece. They have churches throughout various areas in Greece, Latin America. I think they have a church in the Philippines. The True Orthodox Church of Russia under Metropolitan Raphael, or not Raphael, excuse me, Metropolitan Seraphim of Moscow. And basically, those are the churches we've been in communion with, out of communion with. There was a question on Yugoslavia that popped up. And so, we're open to communication with any True Orthodox Synod. Most of them disregard us, and that's fine. We don't care either way. Our job is to, teach the true faith. We can't, if we make everything about being in communion with people, and this is something that we learned, we learned even in our own experiences with communion. If you make things about communion first, something gets lost. And what gets lost is the desire to focus on defending the true faith. So I hope that helps, Justice. I don't know. Basil Polivka again. What do you think of so-called natural theology and more or less philosophical arguments for God's existence? I think they have a limited utility. I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong. I think that they're limited, though, because we, as Orthodox, experience God directly. They're good lead-ins. They're good explanations to open the heart. And what I mean by that is the heart can be open or closed to God. And sometimes we use our minds to buffer that. And if our heart is open to God, then, our experience with him will become more real. I think a good thing about natural theology and these philosophical arguments for God's existence is that they help people deal with intellectual rebellion towards God, which is where you find a lot of these atheist scholars and thinkers, so on and so forth. And they help massage that. They help to let that let go. If we just think about the raw complexity of creation and the math involved, which is a naturalistic argument, one has to conclude that there is a creator there somewhere. But ultimately, it is not going to be a substitute for the experience of God, even in the mysteries. It just isn't. It's philosophical discussions are good, but they're not the be-all and end-all of experience, and that is what we reach out for. So I hope that helps, Basil. Okay, let's see. 1683 Vienna. Is the welfare state immoral as it steals money from the rich to give to the poor? Legal theft. If we don't have the welfare state, then taxes can be lowered and more money would be donated to charity. Well, that's a libertarian argument. And, as a doctrinaire libertarian, I am not necessarily against it. But am I doing it for Orthodox reasons? That's a tougher question, because what we find is, especially in the late stages of the Roman Empire, there was a robust welfare state. That did exist. It was, related specifically to food, but I would be very hard pressed to say that say, for example, the welfare state has no basis in the church's history. Is it in the church's teaching? No, but that's because the church's teaching was even way further when you think about it on a straightforward level than the welfare state. St. John Chrysostom says that when you give to the poor, you're only giving them what you owe them. And so the point is, that's a really harsh thing to think. It's like that we don't even deserve the money we have. And I think that it speaks really against the libertarian ideal, which I agree with, but that's because I'm a fallen person. But that the Christian ideal is supposed to be so much higher than that, that we're not supposed to be like, that money's mine. That, when you think about Ananias and Sapphira, look what happened to them. It's very, very difficult to say that I can't argue against not giving to the poor. Do I believe that the libertarian solution is better? Yes. But I also believe that the current government we have, the democratic government we have, is basically glorified mob rule anyway. So I personally don't even like the system that we're in. So it's a tough question. It's a tough question, but I would say that the fathers of the church hold an even more quote unquote liberal perspective on giving than we do in the modern era. The early fathers, anyway. Baitlord, should pornography be banned? If so, should the punishment be a crime or a jail sentence? Well, I'll tell you, even pornography historically was banned most of its existence. We live in an era now where porn is so frequent, it's impossible to even remember that 50 years ago, porn was almost illegal. It was almost impossible to get. And I'm not, saying that made it, raised its price, so on and so forth, because people will always have tendencies towards that, even though back then, I remember I hate to say this, but I talked to older clergy and they come from a time period where self-abuse was, so frowned upon that people didn't really look at it. And now we joke about how everyone does it. But is that even the truth? Or are we conditioning people to be okay with porn? Are we conditioning people to be okay with self-abuse? That's a harder question. And one that is unfortunately, it's going to require tough answers. So if you're asking, should pornography be banned? I mean, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be. I mean, it's, I don't approve of it. But then again, I'm not a lawmaker. I'm a clergyman. And a lawmaker, at least in the U.S., would argue that it would be it's protected speech. I don't know. Tough question. Then again, at times we have to go above and beyond the law. The state allows for gay marriage now. We don't recognize that. So just because they have a state certificate, we believe that 2 men or 2 women can get married. We don't believe that. So we have to be above and beyond what the law says. And we have to think bigger. I hope that answers that question, Baitlord. Tough questions today. Basil Polivka. Have you read or are you familiar with Joseph Photius Farrell? P. Farrell. He's Joseph Photius Farrell. He authored some translation of St. Maximus's works, an interesting tome titled God, History, Dialectic. Unfortunately, he fell away. Yeah, actually, he actually helped me in a debate once that I had, the online debate I had with Gerald Daffer. He was one of the people I called upon for help, along with Vladimir Moss and a couple of other people, in terms of answering historical questions back when I was a newbie back in 2002. So, I'm familiar from talking to him. I do know that his works are in some of the seminaries. I didn't know much about his life. Certain things I learned made me a little uncomfortable. But he was already part of some independent Celtic church, and before that, some independent Western group. But he was interesting, to say the least. And I know he was, was an erudite scholar. But as you said, he fell away, and he has passed on since. So, no, my experience with him was largely limited. Atomic Lead, one last papist question. Is Vladimir Moss generally trustworthy? It depends on what time period you're talking about. Basically, if you're talking about anything up to the present day, like he's a historian, and he wrote like a history of the world. I would say basically anything up to 1950 that he talks about. Anything about the pre-schism period, anything about he's great. He's a fantastic author. I've corresponded with Vladimir many times over the years. He's even cited me in one or two of his works as someone saying something. But the point is that when it comes to his discussions on true orthodoxy and who's right among the Cyprianites or the Ungafungalites and stuff like that. It starts to descend into politics. And a lot of that stuff, his polemical works against this synod or that synod, I'm not a big fan of. His work against Romanides is solid. He does point out the errors in his thinking, as well as Kalamiros. So in some ways, he's probably one of the best Orthodox writers of the 20th and 21st centuries. So I would definitely recommend him. Although when he's talking about historical stuff related to true Orthodoxy now, occasionally there's bias, and I don't, But in terms of the sheer volume and the sheer quality of work he does, that's a minor quibble. So that's I hope that answers your question, Atomic Lead. Bait Lord, a fine or a jail sentence? Not a lawmaker. And are we talking about the pornographers or someone purchasing pornography or things like that? It's a tough question. Not sure what to think on. Justice for Orthodoxy. What is the Orthodox position on prophetic dreams? Interesting question. Well, first off, the Orthodox position on dreams, because as I was telling one of my kids earlier, or one of my family members, because I was asked about a dream, and what I said was, at least this is a consensus as I understand it from what I've read of some of the Desert Fathers, not much because I'm not well versed in it at all, but on questions of dreams have three origins. One, they come from God, which is highly unlikely. Two, they come from ourselves, which is very common most of the time, 99% of the times. Three, they come from something, a being in the aerial realm, such as a demon that can affect things. Because once you're in a dream, you are in a place where creatures of the aerial realm can in fact interact with you. So basically, God, yourself, or the devil, and most of the time, it's just yourself. So in terms of prophetic dreams, one thing to realize is that one of the things that you have to, if you are encountered even by an angel in a dream, you have to ask for a blessing because it could be a demon disguising itself as an angel. So that's a tough question, but I would say that the position on dreams is to treat it just like we treat apparitions and we treat other things, with a healthy dose of skepticism. Orthodoxy is about the truth, and when it comes to credulousness, we know that our God is provable enough in terms of his visibility and experience with him that we have a right and a responsibility to doubt things. You have to test the spirits, as the scripture says. So that's something to keep in mind. What is your opinion on the R-Talk, S-Talk schism? I assume we're talking about the R-Talk, the Russian True Orthodox Church under Metropolitan Tikhon of Omsk, and the S-Talk under, I forget the name of the Serbian True Orthodox First Hierarch. I don't have one. I haven't looked at it. I didn't know what it's about. Metropolitan Akaki, I believe his name is, and I have no thought on it because I wasn't even aware they were in schism. I know that there's a lot. That's one of the problems when you're dealing with, I hate to say it, when you're dealing with the GOCs, there's so much confusion, and it's tough sometimes. I mean, I personally think they're both Orthodox. So unless one of them suddenly engaged in a heresy or become Imislavists or something, I mean, I see no reason not to believe that either of them is not Orthodox. Okay. 1683 Vienna. Why is Peter always first in the list of the apostles? Well, because he was the spokesman of the apostles. I would say that's why. He was, he was a beloved apostle. He was, he was the first to proclaim with faith, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." He was the first one to get it. That's a pretty big deal. Okay. Dylan Massive here on somebody's recommendation chat. I want to learn. Well, welcome aboard, Dylan. Let me see. James didn't convene the Council of Jerusalem, Bait Lord. James didn't convene the Council of Jerusalem, in my opinion. He just confirmed what Peter said. Peter made the decision. No, all of them made the decision. It seemed good to, to our Lord and to us. It was a council. It wasn't like two guys. It was all the apostles together. So I would disagree with that. I'd say read Acts in a more collegial manner than trying to read back Petrine authority in it or anything like that, because it's really not there. But in any case, and so I hope that answers that. Then let's see. Dylan Math, Orthodoxy Justice, thank you so much. Okay, thanks, Father. All right, so we've got that part taken care of. Hold on, it looks like I'm getting comments from somewhere, so I am going to just quickly read if this is a question we should be talking about here. Nope, it has nothing to do with the show. Let me check Facebook, see if there are any questions on Facebook. And we shall see. Okay. No, new people. And let's take a look here. People are talking about GOCs. People are talking about people are talking about the TOCs. It's an interesting question. Basically, this is an extension of our Facebook group, the Orthodox Apologetics War Room War Zone. So look up Orthodox Apologetics War Room War Zone on Facebook and make sure to answer the questions. It's the easiest way to get in. A lot of people just click join, and if they don't answer the questions, you can basically write meow on it and I'll still accept it. The only thing I won't accept is I absolutely won't accept the rules, in which case I'll just say bye. But that's a lot of people drop off. Even though we have almost 1,500 members, I get roughly 50 new requests a week, and roughly 40 of them get rejected because people don't bother to answer the question, and we don't. That's not how we let people on. So that's not how we do that. Justice for Orthodoxy, can an Eastern Orthodox Christian venerate an Ethiopian icon? Well, of who? Is it of Severus or is it of the Apostle John? I mean, I don't think that iconographic styles are necessarily a bad thing. I'm a big fan of Mozarabic iconography, and I would venerate those instantly. I wouldn't. And I think that's I think the bigger problem is finding icons of heterodox quote unquote saints. There are perfectly Byzantine-looking icons of Francis of Assisi, but I would definitely not venerate him. Remember, veneration passes to the prototype. And so I'd be less concerned about the style of traditional iconography than who is depicted on the icon. I hope that answers your question, Justice. Dylan Massive, is there any proof to the Orthodox Church being the first? I know St. Ignatius wrote to Smyrna saying, wherever Jesus Christ is, there is a Catholic Church. Well, yes, but he was specifically referring to the Catholic Church, which was one church at the time. The only people opposing them were the Gnostic sects in the Roman Empire, killing them off, calling them cannibals. There was not a multiplicity of churches in the time of St. Ignatius. There were Gnostic sects and there was a church. St. Irenaeus, by the 2nd century, a few years later, already establishes a rule on how to distinguish the church from false organizations, and that is through the succession of bishops. So there had to be the apostolic succession through the creed. And so and that at that point the Apostles' Creed. Now we think in terms of the Nicene Creed. And the body of teaching, the tradition of the church. So those three things were one of the earliest markers that people could use so that they could find the true church. And those markers still work today. Ultimately, when you reduce it right down to brass tacks, ultimately you have three choices. You either have the Orthodox Church, you have the Roman Catholic Church, or you have the Oriental Monophysite type churches. That's it. There's no other ones. And ultimately, I would argue that orthodoxy existed in the West, and so the Roman Catholic Church is an innovation that was created in the 11th century. But likewise, the first rebellious schismatics against the ecumenical councils of the Church from Chalcedon on, and that's why they're called non-Chalcedonians, were these groups. So they can't be part of the church if you believe in the orthodoxy of Chalcedon. So, that's how I would say, that would answer that. So I hope that answers your question there, Dylan. And, if you have more questions, please bring them on. We have 20 more minutes. 1683 Vienna. Do you think Western Europe and the United States will be at least 0.5% Orthodox in the next 50 years? People looking for meaning and beta Protestantism and the RC only offer social liberalism at the moment. Well, I think that's up to us. I think people need to be focused on Orthodox apologetics. I think that much of orthodoxy in the world, even the traditionalists, are affected by ecumenism in that they don't even want to deal with things outside their little sphere. They don't want to go out and they don't want to reach out to people and say it's time to come to the church. And I think if we did that, we'd move mountains. I think that, 5.5%, we could do better than that. Shoot, Islam's doing better than that, and that religion is all, you have to give up pork and put your woman in a burqa. And, we can do so much better. But the reason we don't is because we don't have the information that we need to do that. And that's why we have the apologetics group. It's why we have this show, because more importantly, I want to show everyone, and we want to show everyone, when Father Enoch's here, he's sick, in case you missed that part. We want to show everyone that orthodoxy always has an answer. And because it always has an answer, you have the confidence to go and speak to people about the true faith. And have confidence, God-inspired confidence, that the truth and the answer can always be found in the Holy Fathers. So if we can get to the point where we can fully believe that, where we can fully believe in the power of the faith and our ability to answer the heterodox, the sky's the limit. But we might not even have 50 years. What if the apocalypse happens before then? But should we try? Yeah, absolutely. So I have no idea. And I agree. People are looking for meaning. Protestantism isn't cutting it. And the RC only offers social liberal. I agree with you. We need to offer them the church. As Father Sarah from Rose used to say, repent, it's later than you think. And he's right. Okay, Bait Lord, what do you think about Jews running the media? It's an interesting question. One, I'm not a big fan of the media to begin with, but one of the things that people always say, Jews run Hollywood, Jews run, the music industry. Well, to be quite honest, in a sense, part of that's because of us. And what I mean by that is the theater and ribald secular entertainments were things that the church frowned upon, but they still had a market. And so that's part of the reason why vaudeville was run by Jews. And early theater companies from the 18th to the 17th to the 16th were run by Jews, because they were things that were considered beneath the dignity of Christians. Now that's something to keep in mind. It was beneath the dignity of Christians. I once I read a quote, and Father Enoch put it up, and I had to laugh my head off, because we hear fathers all the time talking about modern secular life and how awful it is, and the media and how awful it is, and then you read St. John Chrysostom, and he's talking about how vulgar and disgusting popular music is. That's 16 centuries ago. So this is a common problem that has existed for a long time. But if Christians aren't going to do it and people still want their base desires entertained, someone's going to fill the market. So I think that's, I hate to say that. It's not even that I would say that the Jews necessarily created the media so much as our fallen nature created the media, and the Jews happen to be the ones that capitalized on it. So, and it's not just Jews, it's also a lot of, secular people who are not Jews. So that's what I would say on that. I think it's, the question of how the media became the media is an interesting one that we haven't fully discussed. Okay. Dylan Massive, is not the Pope in apostolic succession? Wasn't Peter the first Pope? Wasn't then Linus and so on? Absolutely, he was. And many sainted popes of the Orthodox Church exist, like St. Leo and St. Gregory the Great. However, as I talk about who invented the Roman Catholic Church, which you can find on this channel, and I've mentioned Hildebrand of Savannah, he effectively was an anti-pope who destroyed the original succession and created a new succession, even though the Western bishops attempted to stop him during a period where there were lots of popes and anti-popes, and the succession became unclear. So I hope that answers that. Watch the video if you haven't seen it yet. I'm an unbaptized Catholic, and the modernism in the church just has me looking for what traditions have been carried on. Technically, if you are unbaptized and in a Roman Catholic Church, you shouldn't be receiving communion. You should be receiving baptism. What I would suggest, however, since I think you're here and I think you want to learn more, is I would start talking to an Orthodox priest about getting baptized. That is what I would discuss. So, that's just my suggestion to you. I want you to keep on listening. Welcome aboard, and hopefully we can help you bring you to the true faith. And so, 1683 Vienna. Cheers, Father. Great answers. No problem. Justice for Orthodoxy. What is the schedule for this live stream? We hold it every Tuesday at 8 to 10 p.m. I might end a little bit early because I'm by myself and I'm a little tired. Okay. Baylord, thanks for calling out the Jews, Father. Not many people have the courage to expose our greatest allies. I can hear them already shouting with me. I don't think about the Jews that much. I'll tell you something. When I was in Russia, there was a lot of the whole hook-nosed Jew thing, and a lot of the Jews that were there, they were when you were Jewish, it was assumed you were in the mafia because the Russian mob was largely Jewish. So their assumptions of Jews, they didn't think of Jews like nerdy little bankers the way we do. They thought of things like, and I say we as in Westerners in terms of stereotypes of Jews, they were thinking in terms of, gangsters. And so this is something that has to be kept in mind. There's always been a back and forth between Christians and Jews. That has existed since time immemorial. You can find it in Orthodox Spain. You can find it, in Orthodox Russia, so on and so forth. Historically, I hate to say this, but the Christians supplanting the Jews in the Old Testament made them kind of unhappy. I kind of get that. But in any case, I don't, I try not to focus too much on that. And I'll get a little more to that on your next point, Lord. Okay, Dylan asks, I'm not even receiving communion. I haven't even gone through RCIA yet. So do Orthodox believe there were popes? I'm confused. Or is it a greatest among equals type deal? No, you're correct. The Pope was the first among equals. That was the original setup that existed in the Pentarchy between Rome, Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Constantinople, and eventually then it was moved where Constantinople was second. But no, it was always a first among equals, and there were other patriarchs in the West. As well as metropolitan sees which had equal rights. So the West wasn't even just the Pope. But the point is, after the Great Schism, right in that period during the Gregorian reforms and then eventually the election of Hildebrand, the church in the West was a mess, and it was split apart. And out of that confusion, Hildebrand was able to create the Roman Catholic Church, which would be a new succession of popes, which had nothing to do with the original succession. Baylord wrote, 85% of the Bolshevik government were Jews. Yes, but if you remember the provisional government and its relative size, that would not have happened if it was not for the sins of the people. And I have to emphasize this because St. John of Kronstadt, for his work with the Black Hundreds, etc., put firmly the blame on what would happen on the Russian people losing their faith. We can point to Jews and the Bolsheviks all we want, but that would not have happened if the majority of the Orthodox people were not in favor of regicide and were not okay with killing the sacred, the holy Russian royal family. That wouldn't have happened. So we can sit there and go blame the Jews, and there's no point to it. The Jews will live their lives. We live our lives. How much you let yourself get affected by it is one thing, but what we need to repent for are our own sins. And in the case of Russia, they had a lot to repent for. So that's my view. I hope that's not a disappointing answer, but we have to focus on saving our souls, not other people's heads. 1683 Vienna, it's super late here in Europe. Hard to stay up this late on a regular basis. Do you always live stream at this time or sometimes earlier? We generally do it at this time. There are replays on the channel. It is true that it is late, especially for Europe. I understand it's I think 1 a.m. there. So we may make it a little earlier. The problem is we have to balance it out because a lot of our listeners here are like, well, we can't listen because it's too early. So it's tough. It's tough, especially when you're doing a global broadcast. So, but we'll keep trying. We'll try to figure out something. Maybe we'll make 2 1-hour parts for a daytime and an evening one. We'll figure out something. It's still a new channel, so we're going to try to do it. Okay, Dylan Massive. What if I can't afford to go to an Orthodox church every Sunday? Well, it's okay. first off, in the canons, you have to commune at least once every 3 weeks. So if you don't go to church, if you are received as an Orthodox Christian, if you're baptized Orthodox, so on and so forth, you could go every couple of weeks. So that's about the best that I can say. There's the Typica, which means that you can say, so you can do the Sunday readings by yourself at home for the weeks you don't go. But it's not like I'd say, well, you can go to the Roman Catholic Church that's down the block. No, once you go to the Orthodox Church, you're going to the Orthodox Church. So that is my suggestion. 1683 Vienna. Cheers, big guy. Thanks. I don't know how you knew I was fat, but okay. In any case, let me see real quick if there are any more questions that have popped up on Facebook on this subject, and it does not look like there are. If you guys in the chat have any questions, let me know. I'll give it a minute. Otherwise, we'll end it a little early today. Doing all the talking by yourself is a little painful. You need to have a little break for some water or air. Baylord, would it be okay for a woman to work? Historically, okay, I think what you're asking about is modern feminism, which is a whole different thing about whether it would be okay for a woman to work. What I mean by that is historically women have always worked in poor countries. Like if you go to the third world, there was no period where women were like not working. Even in Europe up until roughly the period, the Victorian era with the Industrial Revolution, women worked. They worked alongside their husbands in the farms. The idea that women didn't work is of Victorian origin. It's not even a thing. The question about is if you're talking about feminism and whether women should be treated like men, so on and so forth. No, I don't agree with that. But would it be okay for a woman to work? Well, if she needs to work, she needs to work. If she has kids and they don't have enough money, that's what you do. Okay, Dylan Massive, playing devil's advocate. Why is the Orthodox Church so small? The Catholic Church is across all waters. Well, technically, I would argue that the Orthodox Church is across all waters too. I mean, the point is neither of them have done. If we want to look at the statistics, it's 1 billion versus 300 million, and there are 7 billion people on Earth. So as far as you could argue, okay, well. Basically like 1/7 or 1/21st. But in either case, you're not talking about like half the Earth or you're talking about 3/4 of the Earth. The truth of the matter is nobody's managed to, all we've managed to do on either side is manage to spread the gospel across the waters. But how successful have we been in keeping people? And in cases like Latin America, how much abuse was required in Asia? I mean, we just took in 11 clergy. We just made 8 clergy in the Philippines. We have a lot of opportunity, especially with the Western Rite, to grow. But I'll tell you a funny story. One priest I knew, he went to Peru. He was going to use the Western Rite. And he was prepared, to do a Western Rite in Spanish, and everything would have been great. And when he got off the plane, he was handed a letter, and it was from the local Bishop of Lima, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Lima. And it basically said, welcome to Peru. You are welcome to do the services here, your Orthodox services here, provided they are all done in Greek. So you see, there are even government connections to the Vatican, keeping Orthodox from doing, the most that they could do to reach out to people. Now, again, we still have a huge failure in countries where there is no concordat. But it is important to realize that some of the ways that we've lost out in terms of evangelism have been quite intentionally on the part of the Roman Catholic Church, and they would do the same thing to us as we would do to them, although they have more power over governments. And now they're complaining in Russia because they can't evangelize. Well, that's too bad. That's the shoe on the other foot. But then we're looking at Ukraine. So there's so much to discuss on that one that I would say truth is not determined by numbers. And in every major heresy, the majority has fallen for the heresy until the truth is revealed. So that would be my argument. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Dylan. 1683 Vienna. Well, didn't mean okay. That's okay, but I am fat. I should lose weight. Okay, Baylor. Does the Bible say that women can work? Jesus said they should work at home and raise the children. Not sure where he says they should work at home and raise the children. I don't actually remember ever reading that in the gospel. But if you find it, let me know. We can look at context, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't against women working because even the earliest female martyrs sold some of their crafts at the local fairs, even during the martyric period before Constantine. Thank you, Deacon Joseph. I've been looking into your and your other TOC synods for a while now and have gained much from talks like this. I hope to become a catechumen by age 18. I'm 16 at the moment. Well, why not become a catechumen now? It's up to you. I mean, I understand if it could cause a problem with your parents, but if not, we would in the Western, right? They tonsure people to be clerics starting at 13. So, hey, Lord, since Jesus says that men are leaders of the family and wives should submit, if the husband wants 10 babies and the wife doesn't, is the wife obliged to? Okay, well, in the first place, that would be St. Paul. In the second place, asking for 10 babies is not something that is totally the power of the wife. That's mostly the power of God, as long as no contraceptive methods are used or attempts to block births or anything like that. So the family should want to have as many babies as possible. I think that's, but I think in the face of declining birth rates, I'd be very surprised to, I have 5 kids and I have 3 stepkids. But my point is, not everyone can do that. And, some people are good with, 3 or 4 kids. I mean, if a husband wants 10 kids, well, good luck, get to work. I hope you have enough time. And I hope your wife is young enough and that she's willing to do it. There are, of course, there may be health risks, but a perfectly healthy young mother can have that many kids. It's not common anymore. And I hope that the husband who says he wants 10 babies knows how to pay for them. So that's kind of an important thing because the man is supposed to be not just in charge of the house, but to take care of the house. So I hope that answers your question, mate, Lord. Bishop Hernandez, good luck, Justice. Dylan Massive, what about the 1054 schism? Didn't East split from West? No. Actually, Humbert's document was an anathema upon a lot of false charges. And Humbert was part of the party, the Gregorian Reform Party, that would eventually become Hildebrandt's party that would elect him. And there's a lot of chaos in the West in that period. So even at the time of the schism, Clement III, for example, and we're getting the documents on this, piece by piece, we're finding the old documents, but he was actually trying to reach out to the East to reestablish communion. So this is something to keep in mind. And it wasn't until Urban II basically promised the Byzantine emperor the promise of, I think, 1 million troops for a crusade to take back the holy places, that it was even considered that the Byzantines would recognize Hildebrand instead. Okay. The Old Testament says homosexuals should be given the death penalty. Should we restore this? I'm pretty sure that some countries do actually still have the death penalty for homosexuals. I don't believe that killing anyone is necessary. I'm not a fan of that. That said, the gay lobby, it does need to be stopped. I think the current rule of law in Russia, as it exists, they do not put homosexuals to death, but they don't allow them. They don't allow the gay lobby into the educational system, so on and so forth. They don't allow they keep that stuff out. I think that that's all that's really necessary. The rest can be handled by, police protection, if there's attempts to molest children or things like that, or try to indoctrinate them. I think that that's all you really need. But the problem is, I think what's happened is we've seen such a horrifying pendulum swing, especially in Western countries like the U.S. and Europe, where we're basically pushing it on children, that it's causing an equal and opposite reaction where people are saying, well, we gotta kill them. We don't. We just have to get back to a sense of normalcy. And that's the job of the church, is to, preserve normalcy till the end. So that is that's that. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Dylan, I guess you're just talking to Baitlord. 1683 Piana, what is the Orthodox position on the death penalty? Well, there's not a position. The state decides whether or not to put people to death. The church will occasionally try to mitigate that. There's not, but the church doesn't make the laws. The state does, and the church submits to that. Even in the Code of Justinian, where a wife could be put to death for divorce, it was the church's intervention that led to the divorce rules, where the woman could be put away and left aside to avoid, following the straight letter of the law and killing her. Wow, we ended that one on a dark note. Okay, so again, thank you everybody for being here. It was great talking to all of you. It was great answering your questions. Say a prayer for Father Enoch. Hopefully, you'll feel better next week from his cold, and we will see you next week. No, we're not having a fascist regime, Baitlord. Good night. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.